guys, and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson, we're looking at key knowledge points 425 and 426. That is Unit 4, Area of Study 2, and the 5th and 6th key knowledge points for this area of study. Today specifically, we're looking at low-risk strategies to overcome employee resistance and high-risk strategies to overcome employee resistance. And the different low-risk and high-risk strategies that you need to be familiar with are listed in these key knowledge points. But be aware that both of these key knowledge points use the word including, so if you are aware of any other strategies that could be implemented to overcome employee resistance, you're welcome to talk about them in assessment tasks. Now, when it comes to employee resistance, at this point you should be familiar with the idea that employees can and often will resist change. Typically because they are fearful or frustrated or uncertain about how that change will impact them. Certainly, where changes are proposed that will impact employees in a negative way, employees are going to resist those changes. They're unlikely to be on board with giving the CEO a pay rise if it means that some employees have to be made redundant so the business can afford it. Employees are unlikely to be supportive of any change that means employees are going to lose their jobs. So, in many cases, businesses will face a situation where they're trying to implement a change that employees will resist. And I should just clarify, I've just given two examples where probably employees would be right to resist the change. Employees can often also resist changes without logic or good reason. Perhaps it's you're looking to change the uniform. Perhaps the old uniform was a bit outdated and you're looking to redesign the brand image to be a bit more modern or a little bit higher quality, a little bit of a more luxury image. So you're looking to roll out a new uniform to your employees, and maybe some employees are just being difficult and refusing to wear it. Whatever the case may be, there are all sorts of changes that businesses will propose, and where those changes are going to have impacts on employees, whether those are positive or negative or completely neutral, some employees might resist those changes. And where employees are resisting change, you need to have strategies that you can implement to overcome that employee resistance. Well, the key knowledge points that we're looking at today describe different strategies as being either low risk or high risk. In this case, the risk associated with these strategies is the risk that the strategy might fail, and if it does fail, could in fact increase employee resistance. Low risk strategies have a low risk of backfiring and increasing employee resistance. High risk strategies have a much higher risk of backfiring and increasing employee resistance. The first of our low-risk strategies is communication. This involves talking honestly and openly with your employees, particularly answering questions about the changes that are being proposed, certainly communicating to your employees what the change is and how it will impact them, being really transparent to remove or reduce uncertainty and to eliminate any unnecessary or unwarranted concerns that the employees might have. Where employees are filled in on the details, where management have been open and transparent and communicated very openly, then employees are less likely to be resistive of proposed changes because they're uncertain about what's going on. If they understand what's going on, if management have very clearly communicated the need for the change and the way that their proposed change they see will fix whatever problems it is they're trying to solve, then employees are going to be less resistant to that proposal. And of course, this kind of strategy, this open, clear, and transparent communication, is a low-risk strategy because that has a very low risk of, in fact, increasing employee resistance. No one is going to look you in the eye if you are honest and transparent and open in your communications with them and tell you to get stuffed and be more resistant to whatever you've proposed in the first place. The next low-risk strategy would be empowerment. Typically, we all like to think that our ideas are good ones. And if you're in charge of something and you get it done, you're likely to think that the outcome was pretty good. You're less likely to think that your own work is terrible. More to the point, you trust yourself, I would wager, and you know that if you're in charge of a situation, you're probably not doing a dodgy to hurt yourself. Well, that's how empowerment works. Let's say I'm the boss and I come to you, one of my employees, and I say, hey, there's this change that we're rolling out. I'd like to put you and these other employees in charge of this process to make sure that we can achieve the objectives we're setting out to achieve with this change. Well, if you trust each other, you trust yourself, you're more likely to be on board with that change. You're certainly less likely to resist it. If the change is, hi guys, unfortunately, our business numbers aren't looking great. We're not bringing in as much profit as we need to. Unfortunately, someone needs to be made redundant. You're all professionals. I would like to sit down with you guys and maybe we can look at some key performance indicators, look at some employment data, and we can come to an agreement about which of us will take that redundancy. And giving authority and responsibility for that decision-making to the employees, the collective group, is going to get buy-in from those employees. And the employees will see that this change isn't necessarily being enforced upon them so much as it is that they're being involved in the decision-making process in regards to that change, and therefore will trust the process and be less likely to resist it. Certainly, empowerment is low risk. Giving people responsibility and authority to make decisions themselves is not likely to backfire and increase their resistance. Support is another very low-risk strategy. Support is fundamentally implementing strategies and taking steps to show your employees that you care about them. Support is one of those strategies that we have talked about already in the Unit 3-4 curriculum. We talk about it as a motivation strategy. And at the time I introduced it in Unit 3, I said that it's about building trusting relationships with employees, about showing them that you care about them, you value their well-being. You're looking for ways to support them, or strategies that you can implement to support them when they might be having struggles or concerns. You're trying to eliminate barriers to their ability to be able to do their jobs well. You foster a trusting environment. A supportive manager is likely to be a very good communicator, someone who eliminates fear and uncertainty from the workplace. And certainly a manager who is supportive of their employees, who has built trusting relationships with the employees, is less likely to encounter employee resistance because the employees will trust that that manager has their best interests at heart. And when that manager is rolling out a change or proposing a change, the employees will understand that this manager is not malicious, is not careless. This manager is doing what is necessary for the business, and it will have taken as many steps as necessary to eliminate or minimize the amount of negative impacts that will be felt by the employees. And certainly, a supportive manager is one who is going to have the trust of the employees. So support as a strategy has an almost 0% risk of increasing employee resistance. It is the lowest of low risks. And we have incentives. Performance-related pay is one of the incentives we have looked at when we talked about motivation strategies. And certainly offering incentives to employees can be a way to mitigate or overcome the resistance to a change. It might be that you're going to change business hours that will in fact mean that employees have to work a little bit more per week or per fortnight. But if that comes with a pay rise, employees might see that as a fair trade-off and be less likely to resist the change. You might be asking that your employees go for training that is outside of their normal business hours, but perhaps the result of that training will be that they then qualify for an increased rate of pay. They're less likely to resist that change. Where employees are being given something or get something that they can see as quite plainly positive out of a change, they'll be less likely to resist the change on the basis that they don't know what they're getting out of it. Certainly, we know that performance-related pay works as a motivation strategy, and in the case of change management, if you can offer someone something that they want, they'll be more motivated to engage with the change, and any engagement with the change is going to offset any possible resistance to the change. So incentives do work, and certainly offering someone a pay rise is probably unlikely to backfire and increase their resistance. Offering someone a promotion is unlikely to backfire and increase their resistance. But of course, we're not just talking about low-risk strategies. High-risk strategies can work to overcome employee resistance. And typically, apart from the difference between low-risk and high-risk strategies being the risk, high-risk strategies can work much more quickly than low-risk strategies. Communication, support, these things can take time. Building trusting relationships can't just be done in a 1-hour meeting. However, high risk strategies, if you need to overcome employee resistance and you do it now, both of the strategies we're about to talk about can be implemented very quickly. Manipulation is lying, essentially, lying to your employees. Instead of communicating transparently and openly, it might be communication with the appearance of transparency and openness, but the selective communication of information. Maybe you point out a problem with the business and you propose a change that might solve that problem, but you neglect to mention to the employees that half of them will lose their jobs. Well, you'd certainly get their support. They would be on side. Their resistance would be overcome. But if they found out you were lying to them, then the resistance to that change would increase dramatically. That's why it's a high-risk strategy. When you're lying to people, if you're found out to be a liar, you're going to lose whatever support you did have. Manipulation can work. But in the event that it doesn't, it won't be a neutral affair. It will be very negative for you, and you will increase employee resistance. That's why manipulation is a high-risk strategy. But I reiterate, it can work to overcome employee resistance. If you're just telling people what they want to hear and keeping the bad news from them, they're unlikely to resist your proposal. It can work to overcome employee resistance, but it's very high risk. The next high risk strategy, of course, is threat. This isn't going to work if you're not sincere. And when we're talking about threats, we're not necessarily talking about do what I say or I'll beat you up, because that would be wildly illegal. And I'm sure the employee knows that you'd face legal consequences if you went down that path. But it could be, we need to make this change, and we need to make some people redundant as a result of this change. You're going to get on board with this change, or you're going to be the one made redundant. And if you're sincere about that, if you are really threatening an employee's ongoing employment, their job security, if they don't get in line with your proposed change, and they know that that's a serious threat, well, in most cases, people will back down pretty quickly. If they know that getting on board with the change means that their job's safe, they don't have to risk their own employment, then they're probably not prepared to stand up and challenge you on that and risk their own employment. Of course, if that threat is insincere, or if they are just very brave, making threats is not going to be neutral. If they do challenge you on that, well, first of all, as soon as you threaten someone, you've damaged the relationship. They're not going to trust you anymore. And someone who doesn't trust you, if you've got a damaged relationship with your employees, if they do choose to resist that change, they're going to be far more resistive than they ever were before. Certainly, the same is true of manipulation. If you are found out to have manipulated your employees, you're going to damage your relationships with your employees. So not only will you have increased resistance now, but you would have much more increased resistance in the future anytime you tried to implement a change or overcome employee resistance, because your employees aren't going to trust you anymore. If you're going around lying to and threatening your employees, they're not going to trust you. And if they don't trust you, if you're operating in an environment with a distinct lack of support, then your employees are going to be disengaged and demotivated. They're going to be less productive, less efficient, and far less supportive of any initiatives you try to roll out to your employees. However, that needs to be said with an asterisk. That's true. But if your threat is sincere and balanced, so it's not just bullying or harassment, if your threat is sincere or your manipulation is done well, these strategies can overcome employee resistance and can do it very quickly. If you walk out of your office one day and say, we're hemorrhaging money, we need to make some cost savings, someone needs to be sacked by the end of the day, the next person to make a mistake is getting sacked, and then you follow through with that, you've threatened them all to work well, to not make mistakes. You're probably going to see an increase in care taken with their work. You'll probably eliminate defects for a little while. It would work to overcome employee resistance in that case. If you do need to compare high-risk and low-risk strategies, the low-risk strategies can take a long time to work, whereas the high-risk strategies can work quite quickly. The low-risk strategies have a low risk of increasing employee resistance, whereas the high-risk strategies have a higher risk of increasing employee resistance. And the low-risk strategies will not just maintain, but might even improve or contribute to the development of positive relationships and positive culture. Whereas the high-risk strategies have a higher likelihood of damaging employee relationships and damaging the corporate culture to make future change more difficult. In summary for this key knowledge point, employee resistance is a restraining force for change. We know this. And a manager who's looking at implementing a change that the employees are resisting needs to implement strategies to overcome that employee resistance. Some strategies are considered low risk because they have a very low risk of failing and increasing employee resistance. The low risk strategies that we've talked about today are communication, empowerment, support, and incentives. The high risk strategies that we've talked about today, which are high risk because they have much higher risk of backfiring and increasing employee resistance, are manipulation and threats. That's all for today. See you next time.